Hey everybody, it's Ornlu, and since the King of the Desert 2 tournament is coming up, well, tomorrow as of recording this, I thought it might be a good idea to give you guys all a nice preview, my thoughts on the players, settings, map, I guess, singular in this context. So yeah. Uh, hey guys, it's Ornlu, and since the King of the Desert Hey guys, it's Ornlu, and since the King of the Desert tournament is starting tomorrow, as of recording this video, thought it would be a fun idea to give you my thoughts on the players, maps, settings, my personal predictions, all that sort of stuff. And I guess just to give you a quick overview if you were not familiar with the tournament, King of the Desert 2 is the follow-up tournament successor to the first King of the Desert tournament, obviously, and it is, of course, organized and hosted and partially sponsored by MemTV, so I'll leave a link to his stream in the description. Also partially sponsored by Microsoft and Matt Salsa, so thanks to all those individuals slash organizations for allowing me to do this. Before I get too deep into the specific players, matchups, all that stuff, thought I'd just quickly go over the settings, just to, familiarize you guys with it, so I can reference it later on when I talk about the players. So let's do that. So here I have a practice draft, as you can see, of just some civs I think that are pretty good. I didn't put too much thought into it, but I think it will provide us a nice little example of the sorts of civs we can expect to see. Of course, the only map is going to be KotD to Arabia. If you have not seen this map on any streams like mine or any others recently, it is pretty much just like normal Arabia, except there are no ponds. Woodlines are a little bit thicker, but a bit more sparse, I would say. And there are no cliffs, and potentially the most noticeable differentiating factor, I guess, is that you start with one of your goats, I mean, it's sheep, under your TC, as opposed to potentially not being able to find them right away and then having a bad start through no fault of your own. So that's why you see a lot of players pick Chinese. That's why I put it in that sample draft. The civs are all pretty much, if you've seen my 1v1 Arabia tier list video, they're the good Arabia civs. So I definitely want to note that there are stipulations to these civ draft settings, in that although I pretty much picked a bunch of good civs for each of the players, since I picked both in this sample, for the first 4 rounds of the tournament, you cannot repeat your civilization. So you'll actually have to play most of the civilizations if you advance deeper and deeper into the tournament. So you're going to want to probably spread out like the good civs with the maybe not so good civs. So maybe like trying to use the weaker civs in the earlier rounds, so you can then use your good civs in the later rounds. It adds another level of mind games and planning and strategery that is, why I think makes these tournament settings, I think, interesting to talk about. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the specific games. I'll talk about that when I talk about the players. But I just thought it would be useful to go over that sort of stuff and tell you the sorts of civs I think would be good. So pretty much all 10 of those civs are really good for the reasons that I would talk about all the time in my 1v1 Arabia tier list video. Of course, the addition of Chinese, like I said, is there because you do have the starting goat under your TC, and the reason that that is so beneficial for Chinese is that it mitigates any sort of early game risk you might have in terms of not finding your starting sheep right away, and you essentially get 2 villagers ahead for pretty much free from the very onset of the game, making Chinese going from a, okay-ish civ to like a really good civ. So that's why we see Chinese picked very early on in most drafts, but beyond that, it's good Arabia civs. And I think the only other thing I'd say is that when doing a draft, no matter if you're, having to weave in weaker civilizations that you might not want to otherwise, you're going to want to have a decent balance of civilizations. And you can sort of, maybe predict what your opponent's going to be picking based on, the progression of the games. But generally speaking, you're going to want to have at least one good archer civ, like dedicated archer civ, one good dedicated cavalry civ, and one, at least fairly dedicated infantry civ. So, make sure you kind of have that, or kind of, I'd say, some flex spots, I guess, depending on what your playstyle is or what civs you particularly enjoy or what you have to pick due to the settings. But beyond that, pick good civs, and I'm sure we'll be seeing players do that as much as they can. Okay, now with that logistical stuff out of the way, let's get to the fun stuff, the brackets here. So it is obviously a single elimination tournament with the first 3 rounds being a best of 5, the semifinals being a best of 7, and the grand finals being a best of 9. So the way the seeding works is a little bit complicated, but in short, it's your ladder rating based on the end of the cutoff period for the signups. So it's your ladder rating with certain stipulations and bonuses given to players that have done well in tournaments previously. So that's why we see the Viper #1, despite him not finishing #1 on the ladder. So yeah, with that out of the way, I'll just go down the matches, tell what I think about the players and the matchups, and then give my predictions for the rest of the tournament, which of course I will be trying to cast as much of as possible. So our first matchup is Viper versus Black. #1 seed versus #32 seed is obviously yeah, Viper should honestly stomp Black here. I mean, maybe Black can pull something creative and crazy out, but I don't usually see him do anything too wild, other than like the occasional tower rush, but I would definitely suspect Viper to use his weaker civs here if possible, because this is, this should be his easiest match. So definitely would expect to see Viper pick, Koreans here or something like that. So it still might be entertaining to watch and see if Viper can do one of his signature masterpieces. For our second match, it's actually the exact opposite. So it's actually the 2 middleist seeds with ACCM versus CL, also known as Happy Happy. So this one is actually, I think, a really interesting and close match, because ACCM is just kind of a solid Vietnamese player. He's been around forever. He's had some decent results in the past. I think he did pretty well in KotD 1. I think he made it to like the round of 8 or round of 16 or something. But, generally, pretty solid player. More consistent than most of the Vietnamese players, but still definitely with that potential for very strong performances. And he's against CL, who, if you've watched any of my streams for ECL recently, I love CL. He's a great player. He's a very unorthodox player. He goes for lots and lots of walls, not a lot of feudal age, loves the castle age, loves working with his unique units, his archers, stuff like that. But he's got a very unorthodox style, and he, like I said, I cannot underscore enough how much he loves his walls. So we'll have to see how the fairly standard, but generally a bit more aggressive ACCM, matches up with the very sort of passive CL. So yeah, I think it will be a very close match, probably a 3-2. Probably going to favor CL slightly, but it could go either way. Next match is going to be Hera versus Project Belgium. This one is actually happening tomorrow as of recording this video, so see if I'm right with my predictions very quickly. But Hera, one of the best up-and-coming players in the world, of course plays for Aftermath in ECL, recently joined them a couple stages ago. And I think he broke 2K6 recently. I think he was ranked #2 on the ladder. So really strong play from him recently. Definitely very focused on like 1v1 Arabia, kind of like Leary back in the day, or Leary today. But of course he'll be going up against Project Belgium, who hangs around my stream all the time if you guys watch that. And I think he's been in several of my YouTube videos as well. A very good player, another up-and-coming player, but not quite at the same level as Hera, I would say. I mean, I love Bugum, but I think Hera is just the clear favorite right here. I do expect him to win 3-0, maybe 3-1 if Bugum can pull something pretty fancy. But yeah, I think Hera's his micro is incredible, and he's just a very precise, fast player. So I definitely expect him to win here pretty handily, but we'll see if the Orange Menace himself can pull something out here. Next match is definitely a very interesting one. It will be Tato versus Stark. So Tato, I'm sure most of you know him. He plays for Secret, one of the best players in the world. Very creative player, loves his towers. Very sort of interesting, thoughtful player. And he will be up against Stark, the booming machine. Just recently got knocked out of the NAC2 qualifier. So definitely a very solid player, but not one I would say that is quite at Tato's level, if I had to guess. Like, Stark can definitely take games from the best, but I think that Stark is potentially a bit too passive and a bit too predictable. And I think Tato is the sort of player who is calculated and very, has the good preparation to exploit Stark's weaknesses. So I do suspect Tato will win, but I think Stark will probably edge out one game, so I probably predict 3-1 for Tato, but I still think it's going to be an interesting match to watch. Next up, we have the Max, who's coming in at 4, so a very high seeding for our Finnish superstar. He'll be up against GKT Cloud, the Taiwanese player. Notable for, I believe in the last KOTD, he pushed Leary to the brink. But other than that, I don't see Cloud play too often. He's not on an ECL team. I think he's on Alliance. But he's just like a solid 2K3, 2K4 player. But of course, it's Seed 4 versus Seed 29. The Max is going to be a massive favorite. He's been playing extremely well recently, especially in team games. Don't usually get to see him rock the 1v1s as often, but whenever I do, he's always been very impressive. And I'll be very, very intrigued to see how far he'll go in this tournament, because the last time I saw him play in a 1v1 tournament, I'd be very interested to see how well Max will go here, because I believe he got to the semifinals of the last KOTD tournament. I think he lost to Viper there. So obviously he had a deep run last time. We'll see if potentially he can get even further this time. Our next match should be a pretty crazy one. It will be Backed versus Lix. Backed, of course, won the last ECL 1v1 event, beating Tato. And Lix is a player for SY, was part of the 2v2 team that won Africa 2v2, I believe, alongside Yo. And he is a very sort of unorthodox player, along with Backed. Both of these guys can go very aggressive. Both of them love their towers, love their sort of, walling and towering and crazy trushes, and games devolving into silly situations where you have people with 30 villagers at the 30-minute mark. Definitely can expect to see some crazy stuff here. I think Backed is probably just the stronger player. He's been playing incredibly well in 1v1s recently. Of course, I forgot to mention he won the first NAC2 qualifier. So I think Backed is, he's doing really well right here. I think he should win, but probably 3-1. I think Lix can probably pull one out from Backed if I had to guess. So next we have Lix's SY teammate in Yo, one of the best performing players recently as well. Just incredibly consistent, high levels of play from him. He's almost always at the, top 4, top 5 of the ladder. Just such a strong macro player. I mean, he's been around forever. I mean, there's a reason he's touted as, top 3 in the world. Super experienced, and he will be up against Daniel, who's definitely one of the most up-and-coming American players. But, yeah, I think Daniel should be a little bit outclassed by Yo right here. It's, Daniel, I think, hit 2K4, but Yo is 2K6, and that's not an insignificant difference. So I think Yo should win 3-0, but maybe Daniel can pull something through. And of course, as a fellow American, it would be nice to see an American do well for once. Next up, we will have a pretty interesting match of Slam versus Say My Name. Slam, of course, playing for Secret. Played in the most recent 1v1 event, but didn't have too great of a performance. I think he went to the round of 16. He's a player that usually chokes in tournaments, to be honest. He's an incredibly strong player. When he's playing at his peak, he's easily one of the best players in the world, but just not very consistent, especially in tournaments. And he'll be up against Say My Name, also known as Yellow for you old school people. And yeah, he's just an old school player. He's, again, another very inconsistent player, so this could be a really, really weird series, but I'll be interested to see how it goes. I think that Slam's peak and even average is probably higher than Say My Name's, though. I mean, Say My Name can play really well, but I feel like Slam is just kind of at, a little bit of a higher level. But of course, it depends, on the motivation that these two guys have to play. And I'll just be interested to see how this goes, but I think it should be Slam 3-1, I'd say. Next up, we have our number 2 seed in Leary, of course, the finalist from the last KOTD, versus Harrible Barles, who had a pretty deep run in the last NAC2 qualifier. But other than that, I honestly don't have a whole lot to say about this series. Leary should win pretty dominant fashion. Again, Leary might just use 5 very weak civs here, so we might be able to see some shenanigans. But Leary, unlike Viper, is not, I'd say, as likely to go for the crazy strategies. I think he's just a very standard execution-focused player, which is why it's so fun to watch him micro. But definitely expect to see a 3-0 for Leary here. Before I go into Valesse versus Black Mambo / Stray Dog, I just wanted to remember to say that these matches are not necessarily played in order. I'm just looking through the brackets top to bottom. but I think that all the matches are going to be played out of order. I mean, other than the fact that like all the round of 16 games will be played before all the round of 8 games, etc., etc. But just know that you might not be seeing these matches in this order. It's just the order that I'm going through. With that said, Valesa versus Black Mamba. Valesa was just on the 2v2 team that won the most recent ECL East Asia 2v2, so obviously a very strong player in team games. I think he was actually sort of the, not like the breakout player, because we've always known he's been very good, at least in the last year or so. But I think like he really stepped up his game in that really close finals versus Secret, and I think that he should have the advantage over Black Mamba, who is admittedly a very crazy player, loves to go for those forward, like archery range, skirmisher, spearman, tower stuff. But I think that Bless is just a bit more of a well-rounded player, and I should expect him to win 3-0 here. Next up, we have MBL at seed 7 versus Miguel at seed 26, and this is definitely going to be one of the top matches of the round of 32, where you have MBL, who's just been solid as a rock in terms of performance recently, not winning anything, but getting a lot of, second places, semifinals, stuff like that. Honestly, one of the most consistent ladder players out there. I mean, the dude's a machine. He plays nonstop and almost always is in that top 5 as well. And he'll be going up against Miguel, who isn't, I would say, as active as MBL. I mean, it's hard to be as active as MBL, but a really, really strong player, especially in team games. But of course, this is a 1v1 tournament, and despite that, I still think Miguel should have a really strong performance. I do think MBL will win 3-2, but I think it should be, again, a pretty close result. And if Miguel wins, it would be a pretty big upset, but not that big. I think it's actually really surprising that Miguel is so low here. Must have just not been super active in the weeks leading up to the tournament. But yeah, definitely one of the top matches to watch in the round of 32 for sure. Another potentially really good match is, of course, MBL's teammate in Nikov versus Zupi, who is for Suomi. Again, two excellent players. I know I tout Nikov as having the potential to be just one of the best players in the world, up there with Viper, Yo, Leary, etc. And should just be a favorite to win most series. And I do think Nikov is going to be decently favored versus Zupi. I may be slightly biased because as of recording this video, I was literally just watching Zupi play earlier today against Yo. I remember, oh no, it was Vivi. But regardless, Zupi looked kind of a cut below like the tippy top best players. And that's not any sort of, hating on Zupi. I think he's an incredibly good player. Maybe a little bit more so in team games than in 1v1s, but I still think Zupi should be able to take a game off of Nikov. Again, he's just like a solid, well-rounded player, but I do think Nikov should win 3-1. Next, we have the 3 seed versus the 30 seed. So it's going to be the fat dragon himself, Vivi, also known as Really Diao. This dude, everyone loves him. He has a very crazy style, lots of aggression, lots of towers, lots of forwards. But something that I'm always amazed with Vivi in his level of play is that this dude is so good at actually just knowing when to like switch on the boom switch, if that makes sense. Like it's like aggression and then like a bunch of TCs, and it's like always like this perfect balance between aggression and then having the economy to follow it up, which I think is what separates him from a player like Black Mamba or Stray Dog. Whereas like Vivi knows when to cool off on the aggression and then just like really power up the economy behind it. I think he's an incredibly talented player, especially in 1v1s, even more so in team games, and he's a pretty good team game player too. Obviously plays for Frantic, and he's like just almost always in the top 3 in the 1v1 ladder. I think he's number 1 right now, just behind Viper for the highest rating of all time. And of course, he'll be up against Chart, who is another up-and-coming player, Japanese player. Haven't really seen too many games from him, to be honest, but I do know that he's a fairly solid player, but I think it should just be a pretty clear 3-0 for Vivi. I think it's just too much of a skill difference. Final 3 here. We have Fire versus Riot, the mega Brazilian matchup. Of course, 2 Brazilian players, both former Tyrant players, both now play for Bazookas. Fire is currently seed 14, Riot is 19, so obviously fairly close in the seeding, but perhaps surprisingly to maybe some old school players or fans or whatever, Riot being down at 19 because he literally was one of the best players in the world for a good long while. I still think he has probably the potential to be one of the best players in the world, pending his motivation and frequency of playing. But regardless, I think this should be an incredibly close series. I do think Fire has just been a bit more active recently. He is, of course, in the grand finals of the NAC2 qualifiers against Doubt on Friday, as I'm recording this. So that should be an amazing match in itself. But Fire versus Riot, I think, should be pretty close as well. These two guys, obviously, they're friends. They know each other's styles very well. That should lead to some interesting analysis, I guess, or decisions made in the drafting phase. Still have to see how that plays out, because I'm sure they've been, talking a lot about how they think about the game and stuff like that. So I think I would, give Fire the edge, but like 3-2. And if Riot won, and like this was Riot's big return to power, I guess you could say, of a tournament, I wouldn't be that surprised, but I do think 3-2 for Fire. Second to last, we have the Lord himself, Mr. Doubt, currently at 6 in the seeding, versus Yinghua, who is 27. I think this match is probably going to be a lot closer than people expect. Yinghua is an incredibly solid Chinese player. He plays for SY. I think he's also known as Fengshin's Paladin. I forget what Yinghua's other name is, to be honest. But I mention it whenever SY is playing. But yeah, really good Chinese player. And of course, Doubt. He's Doubt. He needs no introduction. He's one of the greatest players of all time. One of the longest active, pro players. And I do favor him to win this series, but I think it will be either 3-1 or 3-2. I think Yinghua is actually like a really good player. We just maybe don't see him as much in a 1v1 setting. But I definitely think he can take a game or even two off of Doubt. But I do think that Doubt knows how to win when it's important. It's just that experience, I think, that can carry him through in a lot of situations. So I definitely do think Doubt should be able to take this. And finally, we have Tim versus Lan, 11 versus 22 seed. Tim is, of course, another old school legend. The dude's known for having what I call Tim A.exe and Tim B.exe, with Tim A being walls, 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 and Tim B being towers, 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 towers. So he's like, very sort of, not like binary, but it's like he either is super aggressive or he's super passive. But like, within all of that, the dude is incredibly smart. He's incredibly experienced. And he knows how to win games. And I think there's no better example of that than the most recent, I think, Middle East 1v1, where he took down Leary 2-0 with just like totally demolishing Leary with just crazy strategies and, well executed attacks and stuff like that. So he'll be up against Lan, who is, I think, somewhat inactive right now. He's no longer on Heresy's like main ECL roster. So maybe he's not going to be super hard preparing for this tournament. Maybe he is. I'm not entirely sure. But I do think Tim should win 3-0 or 3-1. Should be, I think, a pretty convincing performance from him. Obviously, and it would be an idiot to not predict Viper to win. But I think that, some other potential players who, okay, I might not think they're going to win, but they could have the potential to run very deep. I think players to look out for would be Hera, Tato, Max, Backed, Yo, Leary, MBL, Nikov, Vivi, Fire, Riot, Doubt, and Tim. So that's like, I know that's like half the players there, and most of the people I predicted to win the first round, but I think that just goes to speak to the depth of the level of players here in this tournament. I think it should be incredibly fun to watch. I think it'll be interesting to see how the meta develops as the tournament progresses. Who's going to blow their good civs in the earlier rounds because they have tougher opponents, who's going to be able to save, their good civs for the, semifinals? Or, yeah, whatever I said in the beginning. And of course, I think any grand finals best of 9, it will likely be Viper up against somebody else, but the last finals were fantastic, and I am super excited to cast this tournament. I love me some 1v1 Arabia, as many of you know. And yeah, again, thanks to Mem and Microsoft and Matt Salsa for putting this together. Well, Mem has, of course, organized everything, so definitely check those guys out. And stay tuned for my own stream, as I will be casting as much of this as possible. And I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I will see you next time.